Again, this is entitled Digging, and we're digging to lay foundations. Did any of you think about last week's assignment? The Cyrano syndrome? Did you figure it out? I want to ask if anybody tried. That's not fair. There was a French soldier, at least the play says there was, supposedly based on a real guy, play a couple hundred years old called Cyrano de Bergerac. Anybody know anything about that one? Cyrano had such a big nose, he was sure no woman would ever love him, though he was quite a poet, in addition to being a French army captain. He was quite in love with his own cousin, Roxanne. Well, a young man named Christian was assigned to Cyrano's regiment, and Christian was also in love with Roxanne. But when it came to expressing himself romantically, Christian was a total dud. So he asked Cyrano to write letters to Roxanne claiming they were from Christian so Roxanne would fall in love with him. Cyrano agreed. It was going to be easy to write the letters because he loved her, but he thought she'd never fall in love with him, so he agreed to do it for Christian. Well, he did for a while. Things went well. She was falling in love with Christian, so Christian thought he could take over. He made a mess of it, so Cyrano jumped in and saved the day. Well, Christian was sent into battle and killed, and Roxanne got to thinking, well, surely Christian couldn't have done that. He just didn't have it in him. Who would be able to write that kind of letter to make me fall in love with him? Just through letters, she says, the only way I can do that is Cyrano. So she expresses her love for him as he lies dying. Didn't work out very well. What was Cyrano? Not who, but what was Cyrano? I expect you to talk back to me. What was Cyrano? He was a go-between. Now, is that a problem with Bible study? What is the problem in Bible study? Having somebody else study the Bible and teach you, rather than learning to study it for yourself. I'm afraid for most of my 54 years of ministry, I played Cyrano. It's what was expected of me as a preacher. But over the last several years of it, and a good bit since, I've thought, that's not right. I should have spent a whole lot more time teaching people to study the Bible for themselves. And because if we don't, the big problem is there's so many people out there claiming to teach the Bible. If you can't study it for yourself, you're in trouble. But I'm convinced that the more confidence we have in the Bible as it being true, and the more we understand the nature of the Bible, so we'll have more confidence in our own Bible study, we won't leave it to someone else to study and spoon feed us. So we can send Cyrano packing. I dare you to make that a resolution before this class is done, that you will try to send Cyrano packing. I'm going to try to equip you to do so as best I can. Let's review just a little bit what we covered last week. If you weren't here, this will kind of catch up to date. Digging is about laying foundations. In this series of lessons, we're going to consider two very important foundations. One of them is a solid foundation for what? Was anybody here last week? I heard somebody say it. Faith. Thank you. What's the other one? Solid, a firm foundation for biblical understanding. And they're not the same. You can have a great deal of faith from being taught, but very little biblical understanding on your own. And I want to help you have both. Okay, we said there are 7 ways the Bible challenges our studies. It's not a single book, it's a library, and we're going to talk about that some tonight. We'll talk about it more in a few weeks when we do the System on the Bible as an Unsystematic book. The Bible is an ancient book. Two parts of that. The first one is, do we have the Bible as it was originally written? And we're going to start that this week and get into it in great depth next week. Customs, Longo, we'll get that later. It is a book from God, an inspired book. That depends to a great deal on what we study these first few weeks. It's a Middle Eastern book. It's a translated book. It's an unsystematic book. It's a challenging book. The Bible will challenge you. Oh, by the way, pass those around, could you? Keep a couple for the table and send them on around. I said last week, I sometimes get going so fast. If people find it hard to ask questions, if you want me to slow down or need to ask a question, you get one of those flags and flag me down. I'm serious. And like I said last week, there are no stupid questions, not in my classes. Once in a while, somebody will ask me a question that's not a question, it's a challenge. They don't want to learn anything, they want to challenge me. If you want to do that, we'll talk afterwards, okay? But if you have a question that you need some information, you need me to slow down, you don't understand something, flag me down. Okay. We have to start with truth. I mean reality truth. So what is truth? Remember how we defined it last week? Whether it's a TV interview, private conversation, some book, electronic communication, truth is anything what?
That accurately represents reality.
That accurately represents reality. Exactly right. And learn that. I mean, stick that on the front of your forehead anytime you close your eyes, it's there, okay? Because that is the biggest problem I see in our world today. Truth is anything that accurately represents or presents reality. But what about spiritual truth? A lot of people think that's different. If left to our own devices, one man seeks for God in nature, another seeks for God within himself, another in the wisdom of ancient times, another sees God in nature and nature becomes his God, another seeks a message from God in the patterns of the stars, yet another in the pattern of bones cast on the ground. Some look to science for answers to life's questions. I could get into political tirade right now, but I won't, about follow the science. Still another seeks answers by asking as many others as possible. Are any of you old enough to remember the phrase, 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong? That was kind of popular back when I was a little boy. What should we do? Are we to worship God like this? Or like this? You know what this one is?
That's in Mecca.
Mecca. That's the Kaaba, I think it's called. That, I believe, I didn't look it up this time, but I believe I remember correctly, that building will house more people than any other building on earth. Every Muslim is supposed to travel at least once in their lifetime to Mecca to worship God there. Or are we just going to bail out and join the universal church triumphant of the apathetic agnostic? We don't know and we don't care. Is there any solution to all this confusion? Or does it matter? How many of you know somebody at least, well, it doesn't make a difference as long as you believe in God. Does it matter? Does truth matter? Does anybody here have celiac disease? Do you know what it is? It's an extreme allergic to gluten. You can be gluten intolerant without going so far as have celiac. Last church we went to before we moved to Tennessee, Kelly Bowman, the preacher's wife, had serious celiac disease. She didn't have any wheat flour in her house. If anybody went in her kitchen and made biscuits and the flour got into the air and Kelly breathed in, she could be really sick. When Kelly goes shopping, does this sign matter? Gluten-free. Anybody here got diabetes? okay? My oldest son has type 2 diabetes. My neighbor that looks after me, Joe Carr, has pretty serious diabetes. And neither one is careful about the sugars they ought to be. But does the truth of this sign matter? It does. You go to fill your car, and the guy who delivered the fuel to the station made a mistake, and he put diesel in the gas tank and gas in the diesel tank. Does it matter? Ask your mechanic if it matters. If we are honest with ourselves, we know that in everyday life, truth matters. Every aspect. You kids getting in trouble, and you look them in the eye and say, now you tell me really what happened. Of course it matters. I raised 4 sons. I didn't always get the right story. Now, we talked last week that information begins with personal experience and then is passed on to us through testimony. And we sometimes combine testimony or our personal experiences to come up with more information. That's what I call information combination. That's what the science of logic studies. It's how you do that correctly. If we're going to know anything about God, and it all starts with personal experience, even testimony starts with somebody's personal experience, we need somebody to experience God and tell us about him, right? Otherwise, it's just woo, woo, woo out there. If God would just come into our world and speak to us, then we could know the truth about him. But there it is. God's there, and we're here, and there's seemingly an impenetrable wall in between. Until somebody comes. Did you know that is exactly what the New Testament claims about Jesus? He crossed that barrier. But where do we find the information or testimony about Jesus? Well, in the Bible. But is that true? Is the Bible true? Now, the Bible is unique in a lot of ways. The Bible's not a single book, it's a library. It's divided into 2 major sections with 400 years in between. It consists of 66 books, some with no more than a page in length. Parts of the Bible are among the oldest books in the world. The book of Job may be 4,000 years old and the oldest known book in the world. Maybe 2000 BC. It's written in 3 languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Hebrew for most of the Old Testament, because that was the language of the Jews, people of Israel, originally called the Hebrews. Aramaic was a kind of a conglomerate language that developed while the Jews were in Babylonia in exile for about 70 years. It's kind of like, let me use a modern day example. I've gone to Haiti several times to teach a little Bible preacher training school there several years ago. And Haitians labor under a real hard problem. The island, of which Haiti is half, the Haitian end of that island, Dominican Republic's the other half, belonged to the French. It's perfect for growing sugar cane. The French bought slaves who worked the sugarcane fields. All the government, everything was conducted in French, and the slaves developed a language of their own, Creole, kind of like the Cajun Creole in Louisiana, but not quite the same, which was a combination of French and their native African languages. Well, Aramaic was kind of like that. Came from their native Hebrew and the language of their exile. We'll get into that more when we talk about the Bible being translated book. It was written on 2, maybe 3 continents, depending on when Moses started writing Genesis. It was written over a period of at least 1,500 years by at least 40 different authors, yet it has a single unifying theme, and that's God's salvation through the Messiah. Taken as one book, the Bible is a very long book. The King James Version has approximately 783,000 words. The English Standard Version has 757,000 words, and the New International Translation approximately 728,000. An average novel has 70 to 100,000. Yet we bind it all together and carry it around as a book. And if your eyes are real good, which mine are not, but I can manage, you can put it in a big purse or a suit coat pocket. I can read this one, but don't like to for very long. Do you know what Bible paper is? Did you know Bible paper is special? It didn't come from God or anything. Where I lived in Indiana, there was a big printing company, printed a lot of Bibles. Also printed all the Harry Potter books, and all the workers were sworn to secrecy to not let anything out before release date. But anyway, Bible paper has to be special because it has to be very thin, or this it's about 1,800 pages. And yet, the paper has to be opaque enough that you don't have the print from the back side show through to the front side, so you can be able to read it without having stuff show through. That's why Bible paper is special. It's because we put all of this stuff into one book. Well, in this day, we'll treat it as one book. It has many different writing styles. Law, and that's not just the 10 Commandments, much of Leviticus and some of Deuteronomy and others. It's narrative. We talked about that last week. Narrative is just telling a story. Moves things along. There's poetry, Hebrew-style poetry, and songs. The book of Psalms, songs. Psalm is just an old word for song. Is Hebrew poetry. But a lot of the prophecy is also in poetic style. We can't see that because it's really hard to translate rhythm and rhyme. I notice you have the Spanish words on the screen on Sunday morning. Well, I learned to sing in Spanish in college, sang the quartet with a couple of guys from Mexico. And some of the words you have for songs I know are not the same words I memorized to sing with the quartet, because it's really hard to get the rhythm and the rhyme from one language to another. So we don't see it as poetry, but it's there. There's wisdom literature, Proverbs, and some are other classified that way. There's gospel, that's a special kind of narrative. There's letters. In most of your Bibles, they're called epistles. Now, I kid you not, an epistle is not the wife of an apostle. It's just an old-fashioned word for a letter. And there's one that is only in the Bible, and that's apocalyptic visions. Those are 4 beasts in one of Daniel's visions. Think of those, or the book of Revelation. Those are what's called apocalyptic writing. Now, what other book do you know has all those different kinds in it? Most of which, or many of which, are totally unfamiliar to the American mind. As we get reading them, we struggle. The Bible is not in chronological order. The first several books of it are more or less in chronological order. From Genesis through Esther, more or less, though some of them are parallel. Kings and Chronicles are 2 accounts of the same thing, just like the Gospels are 4 accounts of the same thing. The books are arranged more by subject, and in some places just by length. Do you know why the major prophets and the minor prophets are divided? Because the major prophets are longer books than the minor prophets. That's it. It's the big prophets and little prophets. The Bible is not the kind of book where you should start at the beginning and read through to the end. I think I mentioned this at one point recently to somebody, to the maybe whole group. My granddaughter, Tori, when she first came into the family was when my oldest son married her mother. Tori was a high schooler. She claimed to be an atheist. Well, just about time Sandra died 2 years ago this month, Tori became a Christian. And when she came for the memorial service for Sandra, we postponed it about a month and a half because we didn't want people traveling from great distances in January, and she was cremated. So Tori came and she had told me via a phone call, when she came for Sandra's memorial service, I asked her how she was going. She said, I'm reading the Bible. I said, how are you going? She said, I'm halfway through Deuteronomy. I said, Tori, did you start at the beginning? She said, yeah. Well, what am I supposed to do? I said, dear, start with Mark or John. I mean, I get bogged down in Leviticus. I've been doing this a long time. But that's not, well, like I said, we bind it all together and call it one book. The Bible is admittedly the most influential book in the world. It was the first book to be printed after the invention of movable type. It has been translated into more languages than any other book. New translations come out every year. Since the publication of the Revised Standard Version in 1952, which was the first modern translation to really start the ball rolling, there have been more than 50 new English translations of at least the New Testament. As of August 2023, at least part of the Bible has been translated into over 4,000 languages. As of late 2025, the entire Bible has been translated into 781 languages. It is a continual bestseller. An estimated 5 to 7 billion copies of the Bible have been sold since the time of Christ. In 2023, 18,400,000 Bibles were sold in the United States alone. I probably contributed to that. Last 2 or 3 years, I've added 3 new ones to my collection. Yet the Bible has been opposed throughout history. About 165 years before Christ, Syrian ruler Antiochus Epiphanes. His name was Antiochus. Epiphanes was his own nickname for himself. It means the shining one. It wasn't narcissistic at all. He tried to destroy the Jews and decreed that all their scriptures be destroyed. There he is. In 303 AD, 300 years after Christ, Roman Emperor Diocletian ordered all Christians and their Bibles destroyed. Happens in modern times too. Communist China, Mao Zedong, when he was in control, tried to destroy the Bible. There are places in the world today, if you own one, you better not get caught. North Korea, for one. A lot of the Muslim countries. But we consider, for this study, we will consider a single book. Otherwise, it gets confusing. But we want to know, is it true? I know I keep harping on that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be repetitive, but it's important. You've got to understand that truth is reality. It's just an expression of reality. And unless you believe the Bible is real, somebody said the heart cannot rejoice in something of which the mind is unconvinced. If the Bible is not true, say, well, change my mind. If it's not true, it's just another Dear Abby advice column. Maybe the advice is good, and maybe it's not. And so our whole goal is to find out if the Bible is true. The Bible, especially the New Testament, claims to be testimony about Jesus. John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The New Testament says Jesus claimed that for himself. Jesus said, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God and am now here. I have not come on my own, but he sent me. But how can we know the New Testament is telling us the truth? Consider this. Any of you remember when Shirley MacLaine was such a big deal about the New Age movement? It was 40 years ago or so. She claimed part of it that was everybody is God and so on. What was the name of the author that wrote This Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness? Are you familiar with those novels? Peretti. I have a cassette tape. I couldn't remember his name. Tried all day long. I have a cassette tape of Frank Peretti speaking one time. Not as a good writer, fabulous speaker. In it, he's talking about Shirley MacLaine and her contention that everybody is God. And he says, just picture God looking out the window of heaven and looking down to the earth, and he sees this gal dancing up and down the beach saying, I am God, I am God. He says, Gabriel, what do you make of that? Well, Shirley MacLaine, it was making such a big stir. I bought a whole shelf full of books on it and taught on it some. That Larry King, in a syndicated program, interviewed Shirley MacLaine about the New Age. And somebody called and challenged her based on the New Testament, and she brushed him off with the objection that the Bible has been copied and translated so many times in the last 2,000 years, it's impossible to have any confidence in its accuracy. And King said, everybody knows that. What about that? You probably don't agree with that statement, but I'd bet you that all these gift cards in my pocket that you have at least one neighbor who does. Well, is there any way to prove that that is not an accurate statement? Shirley MacLaine and Larry King's statement. Can we prove it is not an accurate statement, therefore not true? Truth is accurate statement of reality, okay? That statement is not true of Bible. Is there any way we can deal with that and try to prove it? Yes, there is. It's called textual criticism. Now, get your dust masks out, because the rest of this digging is going to be a little bit dusty this evening. I have, if I can get off that stool without falling. JR, could you see that, get somebody to help me see it? Everybody gets one of those. It's 2 pages, and they're stapled together, so it should be easier to distribute, and there's a lot more than we need tonight. I'll wait till you get those because I've got a lot of text on the screen that's kind of small. My wife Sandra used to say, you put too much on the screen. She took copious notes. Best note taker I ever saw except for my dad, and Dad took notes of everything he ever heard, every sermon. And she said I had so much up there she didn't have a chance to copy it all. Well, I don't want you to copy it all. That's why I'm giving you this. But it helps me because I don't have to have a manuscript plus my presentation. And I'm of the opinion that if you can hear it and see it, you remember it better. And if you can write something down or reread it later, that's even better. I'll take any of the extras of those and I'll save them for next week if somebody needs them. Textual criticism is a science or art of comparing different copies of ancient writings to see if they differ in the wording, okay? Textual critic will take 2 pieces and look at them. And see if they say the same thing. People, well, why is that necessary? Well, through the centuries, scribes, now a scribe was a professional secretary, not secretary we think of, but all books were handwritten, and so a scribe was a guy who made his living publishing books by writing them by hand. Scribes made copies of copies of copies until Johannes Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press. Contrary to popular opinion, Gutenberg did not invent the printing press. China beat him a long time before that. But he did invent a very significant change in printing. Any of you ever do linoleum prints or wood prints, where you carved a picture and then you put ink on it and you press it on paper?
Yeah.
Takes a while, doesn't it? And then you got to think, okay, I got to see this in a mirror. Now, take a page of your Bible and try to carve that medium so you could put it on a piece of paper and print it. It's easier to just copy it by hand. And that, what was that? What Gutenberg invented, he was a silversmith, by the way, a German. What he invented was movable type, where he carved each letter. In fact, he learned a way to cast them, made molds. His method is kind of lost in history, but he made molds and cast each letter. And then he could take the letters and put them in a little frame and make up a page. And when he was done, dump the letters out and make up the next one. You know, Gutenberg's invention lasted until I was a grown man. There was a thing that came in between that made it a whole lot easier. Do you know what it was? You know what a linotype machine is? The guy sits here and types on this big old crazy machine, and it brings molds up, and there's a big vat full of molten lead that pours lead in the mold. It'll make a slug about that long of the words this guy just typed. And then somebody puts them in a frame. Don't do that anymore. We've got all this digital stuff. But one of the first jobs I had as a very early teenager, one of the young men at the Bible college, was putting out a little magazine. He wanted to be a publisher of kind, and I got a job working with him. He did most of the work, but I actually made up the headlines. Most of what I did was, they called it a printer's devil, was staple his little magazine together with a saddle stapler. But from 1452 until I was a teenager and beyond, things were still printed with Gutenberg's invention. You know what it did? It made it real easy to print a Bible page. Now you use this screw type press, which was used for the previous things like the linoleum prints we make for art stuff. But he could put his paper in there and screw it down, and then he'd go over and proofread it very carefully. Oh, that letter's wrong. That's not Mediterranean Sea is not S-A-E, it's S-E-A. Got time for one funny story? When I was in college in Life of Christ, not Lands of the Bible class, we had to make a map, choose part of the Bible lands and make a map. We'd have a 3 foot wide by about 4 foot long piece, or 2 foot wide by 3 feet long, maybe it was, of what we called map paper that you could use India ink and colored pencils to make a map. And one of the smartest guys in the school made a map of the missionary journeys of Paul, got it all done, and in the middle he wrote Mediterranean S-A-E. He was done. He spent hours on that thing. He was just crushed. Well, with Gutenberg's invention, you could go back and change it. And then you'd print the rest of them. The problem was, when the Bible is copied and copied and recopied by the scribes, kind of the same thing. Any of you play a game called Gossip or Telephone? Different parts of the country, it's different things. What is it?
Telephone.
Yeah, but how's the game go?
Oh, one person has a saying and they give it to the next person.
Yeah, you whisper it. So it gets clear around the end. It's quite funny sometimes by the time it gets to the end. When you copy something by hand, that happens. Though if you're copying something you're reading, it's not nearly as likely to get twisted as when you're whispering it in somebody's ear. But still, that happens. And they did a lot to keep it from happening. There was one group called the Masoretes, Jewish group, not believers in Christ, copying the Old Testament, lasted up until about the year 800 AD, after Jesus, 800 years. When they copied a page of the Old Testament by hand, they would count the letters on the page and mark the middle one. And then when they made another copy, they would count the letters on the page and mark the middle one. And they would check, and if they were different, they'd go back and recopy the page. The problem is they burned the old ones. So there aren't very many copies of Hebrew scriptures older than 800 till we got the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, here's where we get to some more of the words you need to know. Text, papyrus, vellum or parchment, manuscript, abbreviated as MS or MSS. MSS is plural. Autograph, scroll, codex or codices, extant, genuine or authentic, integrity, credibility or historicity, textual criticism, version or translation, uncial and minuscule. I'm going to go real fast through these because you've got that paper that has the same thing I've got here. There may be a few more when we get to them. Text. Text is simply the letters and words, usually in the original language or a translation of ancient writings. We may say a text dates from the 4th century. That means this particular copy was made sometime in the 300s. You know, it took me a long time to think 300s were not the 3rd centuries. But counting from Christ, from 0 to 100 is the 1st century. That my mind never did get that for a long time. When we compare texts, we're actually comparing the words and letters of various manuscripts. And the manuscript is any handwritten document. If you write out a test in school, or you write an essay, or you write a love letter, we don't do that anymore, we send email. If you write it by hand, it's a manuscript. All of the Bible up until Gutenberg, manuscript. Autograph. That's not when you went to the concert and heard Elvis and you actually got an autograph and you could sell it for $10,000 now. In this case, the autograph is the original, actually penned by the author or by what's called an amanuensis or scribe. Peter writes, with the help of Silas, whom I regard as a faithful brother, I have written to you briefly, encourage you and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand fast in it. Silas was Peter's scribe. Peter probably didn't know how to write. He's a fisherman. No autographs of any Bible books, so far as we know, are extant. Extant just means existing and known, available to scholars. There may be some out there somewhere, hidden somewhere, but not that we know about, so we say they're not extant. That's a very technical word in this case. Papyrus. Papyrus was their equivalent of paper, made from reeds that grew mostly in the Nile Delta in Egypt. They would split the reeds, flatten them out, lay them crossways, and scrub them, and rub them until they were smooth enough you could write on them. Papyrus was inexpensive, relatively, but was not very durable. The most ancient papyrus manuscripts have perished. Those that are extant are often quite fragmentary. There's a papyrus manuscript, and it's in a whole lot better shape than most. Within the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are literally shoeboxes full of little bitty pieces, some of them no bigger than my thumbnail, with writing on them. Because the papyrus crumbles easily. Parchment or vellum was the other writing material. It was actually leather, usually sheep or goats, tanned, bleached, smooth to make it suitable to write on. Parchment was more durable than papyrus, but also much more expensive and usually reserved for important documents. Ancient manuscripts of the Old Testament were always on parchment as far as we can tell, but it may be there were some on papyrus that just don't exist anymore. That is the Isaiah scroll. The best preserved of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's on parchment. It still has some minor decay. And it was written, this copy made, Isaiah wrote about 700 BC. This copy made about 200 BC. And there are scholars who date things primarily by the handwriting, but also by where they're found. If you dug up a mayonnaise jar in your backyard and it had a letter in it, and you want to know when that letter was written, and it had some 1925 quarters in it, what's the earliest, in the jar with the letter, what's the earliest that letter could have been written? 1925. Unless somebody put it in the jar years after it was written and added the quarters to throw the scholar off. So there are things like that they date things by. The Isaiah scroll estimates 200 BC. Uncial and minuscule were handwriting styles. Uncial is all capital letters, usually written with no spaces between the letters, often written 15 to 18 characters per line, and we got to the end of the line, you went to the next line, even if it was the middle of a word. Minuscule is more like our modern handwriting, broken into separate words and spaces between the words and some capitals and lowercase letters. There is an uncial manuscript. That's part of Jeremiah. See the the second line down, Jeremoiu. That's Greek, not the Hebrew. It's Greek because it's part of the Greek translation made of the Hebrew language, Old Testament, the Septuagint it's called. It's a translation of the Old Testament from the Hebrew and Aramaic into Greek about 200 years before Christ. It was done in Alexandria, Egypt, because by that time very few Jews spoke Hebrew. Greek was the international language, thanks to Alexander the Great. We'll get into that later. The legend is that it was completed by 70 scholars in 70 days. Very unlikely. But that's a legend. That's hence its name. Septuagint, abbreviated as LXX. Almost done. Genuine or authentic. Now, if you look online and look for the genuineness or authentic or integrity often of the Bible, they're often used to express in a general way the accuracy of the text. In the context of our study, we'll use genuine or authentic to refer to the Bible books being written by the traditional authors. For example, when we say the Apostle John was actually, or the Gospel of John was actually written by the Apostle John, we say it's genuine or authentic. There's some others floating around there. One of the most famous ones is one called the Gospel of Thomas. Very unlikely it was written by the Apostle Thomas, so it's not considered genuine. That's how we use that word. We'll get into these a lot more next week. Credibility or historicity. I love that word, historicity. I don't know why. The credibility or historicity refers to the historic reliability of a Bible book. If a Bible book is credible or historic, we mean it is an accurate record of what actually happened. Remember our definition of truth? Truth accurately represents reality. Credibility or historicity is the degree to which the Bible is true by that definition. A credible record of Jesus' life is something we can confidently believe was real. Integrity of the text. This is the last one. Textual integrity is how well the text we are using agrees with the original. Since we have no autographs, the textual critic compares all the pertinent ancient manuscripts, ranks them as to age and importance, and tries to construct as much as possible the ancient writing. Textual integrity is what textual criticism attempts to determine, because, folks, there are differences in some of the manuscripts from one to the other. There are differences. Now, don't let that throw you, okay? Please don't let that throw you. Do not worry about that. With a good modern Bible, you can know what every one of them is. Open to the bottom of your Bible, and some places it will say, the earliest manuscripts do not have, or they say, it'll tell you. That's the textual critic. There is a lot of evidence to work with, which is where we'll go in coming lessons. Now, I taught this a couple of years at the Bible College in a class called New Testament Evidences. There was a young man in one of the classes, new Christian. He had been won to the Lord through some of the students of the college who also attended Joplin Junior College, which later became Missouri Southern University, I think it's called now. Brand new Christian. He was in the class. It threw him, like my experience with the issue that I told about last week in my testimony, that just, he'd never heard that there might be, there's some verses in the Bible that are not supposed to be there. Because there are a few that are probably not in the oldest manuscripts. There are only 2 instances that are longer than a single verse. We'll get into that a lot more. Don't let it bother you, please, please, please. Just come back next week. We'll go into this in great detail. I do not want it to worry you. This guy was really, really struggling. He was like me. He'd never even thought of that. And here he's a brand new Christian. His faith isn't real solid. And he and I talked quite a lot. He finally took one of the longest ones and did a comparison in a paper and a chart he made for class as an assignment. A comparison with the things listed there, whether they were taught elsewhere in the Bible, so we could see that it doesn't leave out any doctrines or anything like that. So don't worry. Please don't worry. Promise? Okay, we're done. I flew through this tonight. I know I did. I usually separate it out differently, and every time the first lesson just gets really, really loaded. And so I've tried to split it out this way. Next week, we'll go back over a good bit of this and then start looking at the evidence itself. We'll show you pictures and pictures and pictures of the ancient manuscripts. We'll talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you go to Israel today, I'm not sure I recommend it, but if you did, you could go to Jerusalem, and there's a museum there called the Shrine of the Book. And you could go in, and the centerpiece of the museum in the rotunda is a glass case that runs around in a circle like this. It's a photographic facsimile of the scroll of Isaiah. The scroll itself is in a vault that's very carefully climate controlled, so it won't deteriorate any further. But it's like looking at the real thing. You can go see it. You can probably get online and see it if you wanted to. So we'll do that next week in some detail. We'll show you what scholars have said about how little of the Bible has any possible question at all as to whether or not we have the original. And it's not very much. Not much at all. So don't let it keep you awake nights between now and next Wednesday. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this group here, for their interest. I pray, Lord, that I haven't gone too fast, that some of this will sink in. Help us, Lord, to know that you have a message for us that is real. Through Jesus, amen.